Hi everyone, good evening from India. My name is Dr. Anant Bhan. I work with Sangath. We are convening today for Sangath's monthly research webinar for the month of June 2022. As some of you might know, these webinars are organized monthly and are open to all Sangath staff members as well as to a larger audience. Each month, the webinar that is designed focuses on a unique aspect of public health, including mental health. And we usually try to make a connect with the work that we do at Sangath. This opportunity provides us as a collective within Sangath to learn from each other across all our projects and hubs, and also from our invited experts, and to also share resources, learnings, and outcomes. Especially, we make a conscious effort in our webinars to try to engage speakers and presenters from a variety of research and practice specializations related to mental health research, to clinical practice, to health promotion, to public engagement, as well as ethics and involvement of research participants. This month's webinar is being hosted by our Delhi hub and will focus on media narratives and the arts, elevating community voices and enhancing evidence-based interventions. We are today delighted to be joined by three panelists from diverse disciplines and backgrounds who will be sharing their experiences with us. So the reason we have chosen this topic today is because, as you all know, storytelling in different formats can make a huge difference in health. Increasingly, storytelling mediums, for example, films, creative nonfiction, projects, podcasting, graphic design projects, etc., are being used to craft novel public health interventions. Our panelists today are all health storytellers. They use their art using various forms like mass media narratives, to share community voices or to design, deliver, and improve health education, do health promotion, and also to analyze and enhance evidence-based interventions. We do know from research already that sensitive use of language and terminology that preserves the dignity of those with mental illnesses, those who are marginalized, and at the same time avoids miscommunication is beneficial. We also know that long-term anti-stigma and anti-discrimination campaigns that encompass a rights-based approach involve normalization and educational approaches are needed in our work. Media narratives and the arts can be potentially used to increase knowledge, to create favorable attitudes, and to change behavior as well. We need to find ways to optimize the role of these tools in our society for bringing about positive change and for health promotion. We do know that a sensitive use of language and terminology that preserves the dignity of those with mental illnesses, those who have been historically marginalized, and at the same time can help us avoid miscommunication is beneficial. Today's topic has been specifically requested by many staff members at Sangath who want to learn from two aspects specifically. What mediums can be used in the mental health space, and can we draw from ideas, from experiences in working in other health domains? And what are the most important things to keep in mind when involving community voices, and how can this be done meaningfully and impactfully? This is especially important for us in Sangath as we work in the area of mental health, as we work with youth, as we work with marginalized populations, and as we have ourselves been learning. It's an area where there needs to be a lot of humility and learning, and we do hope that today's webinar is part of that process, and we will learn a lot from our panelists in this regard. Of course, there will also be time for Q&A. So in terms of housekeeping, can I request everyone to keep yourselves muted unless you're speaking? You're welcome to keep your videos on, and of course, please use the Q&A and chat function to engage with the panelists and with each other. It is my absolute honor and pleasure to introduce the panelists for today. First off, Jaya Dr Jayashithar, is adjunct professor of health journalism at the Asian College of Journalism in Chennai, and a former special health correspondent for Frontline magazine at the Hindu. She's a senior media health advisor for Internews and a WHO consultant. As the senior technical expert on accountability and media engagement with the resource group for education awareness for community health, also commonly known as REACH, she has supported community-led accountability initiatives for better TV services and strengthen local language media capacities to report on health. Welcome, Jaya, and thank you for joining us today. Next off is Siddhesh. Siddhesh is a multidisciplinary mixed media artist, a visual designer, a researcher, a storyteller, an educator, a dreamer, a surrealist, and an Ambedkarite. Siddhesh is Pune-based, but today he's joining us from the hills of Himachal, I think, and is also an art baker who we know also as at Bakery Prasad from Instagram. He has graduated from NIFT Mumbai, and his work is the personification of his own personal spiritual journey. He shares his glasses with the world in the hope of inspiring a deeper connection between people through design education. His work continues to influence generations of people who handle the same insatiable desire to witness an egalitarian society and aspires to one day ignite the spark of rebellion for years to come. While minimalism and postmodernist thought are the main influence of his work is also based on an in-depth research on the subject. His work is meant to challenge your preconceptions, expand your mind, honor the sacred, and evoke feelings of adventure, exploration, and deep spiritual connection. Siddhesh also strives to impart his knowledge of visual designing among the lesser privileged students of the Nalanda Academy in Wardha, Maharashtra, and he has also been working on a graphic novel on the Dalit movement, spearheaded by Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar. Siddhesh, an absolute pleasure to have you in today's panel. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
Faith is our next panelist. Faith Gonsalves is a storytelling and public health communication specialist. Her work spans leading programs, campaigns, fundraising, and producing media and films, especially for projects related to education, mental health, and gender. She has more than a decade of experience and also as a non-profit leader, having founded Music Basti in 2008 that works with underserved children across India through music, media, and the arts. She's a recipient of the Forbes Asia's first 30 under 30 list for entrepreneurship in 2016, the Karmavir Purastar National Award for Social Entrepreneurship in 2011, the CNN Real Hero Award for Youth in 2011, as well as she was a member of the World Economic Forum's Global Shapers from 2013 all the way to 2018 as well. Faith, again, an honor to have you on the panel as well. I know you're a friend of Sangath, you've been involved in Sangath initiatives, so it's nice to have you also on the panel today. Please join me in welcoming all of our three panelists, and we will now get started with the discussion. So first off, if I can invite you, Jaya, to speak to your own work as a mentor to media professionals, an expert who has worked with community-based organizations, with TB survivors, with champions, on how we can ensure that community voices, concerns, and demands are center stage in a sensitive manner. What can we learn as researchers from your own experience of trying to do this and your interaction with a lot of organizations and individuals in this space? So over to you, Jaya, for sharing your thoughts on this.
Thanks so much, Anant. And if I may share my screen, just a moment. Yeah. Can you see my screen? Yeah.
We can go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just going to. Oh, yes. So, firstly, thanks so much. And if I may put off my video so that I can concentrate. Yeah. So, firstly, thank you to Sangath for this invitation to be part of this really interesting session with speakers from disciplines I don't often get to engage with really as much as I would love to. So I think my piece of it's pretty much neatly divvied up, I think, between the three of us panelists, and my piece is the media piece, and I'm going to focus partly on news media and partly a little bit about the work I've done with TB champions through REACH. So I'm going to focus on public health, and I'll look at mental health through the TB lens and also give a couple of other examples from One Health. So when we look at the history of public health, particularly the areas of family planning or immunization or even hand washing, the phrase that policymakers are fond of using is, we have to turn this into a people's movement. But it's taken actually decades to establish pathways to physically collect community feedback and factor in community needs and community preferences into the way health services are both designed and delivered. So in other words, listening to community wisdom as evidence that can inform public healthcare delivery is gaining traction only now, and much more needs to be done. So some public health programs in India, notably the National TB Elimination Program, are prioritizing, quote unquote, people-centered care. To hear what some of the most underserved people in the country have to say about how they would like to engage with the health system, and interventions are currently underway being carried out both by the program and by several partner NGOs that are approaching people with TB not as passive recipients of treatment, but as equal and involved partners in their own care. So I'd like to share an example of our work with journalists and people with TB to jointly mitigate TB-related mental health issues, primarily depression arising from the stigmatization of the disease. And I'd like to acknowledge the work that REACH has done. This is the Resource Group for Community Education and Advocacy. It's a Chennai-based NGO. It specializes in community engagement and partners with the NTEP for community engagement outreach. And in less than a decade, REACH built up this cadre of TB champions all over the country. And who are TB champions? They're TB survivors who, after being cured of TB, are trained to speak about their personal experiences of living with TB, are trained in human rights approaches to health, and who are today part of the TB survivor networks in the various districts that raise their concerns at TB forums, at government meetings, and speak to journalists boldly and lead TB awareness campaigns in partnership with the Panchayati Raj institutions at the village level. And at the next level, I mean, we're moving on to the next level now with some training. They're going to be manning what are known as TB support hubs at the sub-district level TB units. And, they'll essentially sit there and they'll do many things that can support the work of the senior treatment supervisor as well as the medical officer, TB control at the TU. For instance, they will do a simple mental health screening for people with TB. They'll do gender responsive counseling, carry out a vulnerability assessment. For instance, a woman with TB who seems to be battered. What is she undergoing in her home? They'll carry that out, maybe refer her to a GBV shelter. If it's someone who's got an alcohol dependence habit, refer them for de-addiction counseling or any other kind of support and so on. And they'll also link people with TB to social protection schemes. And why are they best placed to do it? Because of the credibility that they enjoy with their communities and thanks to their lived experience of TB. So when TBCs speak, when TB champions speak, communities listen. So in our sort of work with them, a good deal of their evolution of the TB survivors into TB champions has been through a series of conversations that have lasted years in order to get past their identity as people with TB and see them as human beings. So one of the things that we're moving towards is like getting them to express themselves through poetry, dance, art, music, and so on. And they've already been doing a brilliant job in their campaigns.
Alert from updates available.
Sorry, that's my computer speaking out of turn. So here's a stigma mitigation workshop in an art workshop that was done with people with TB champions. And as you can see, these three drawings that you see on the screen are by women TB survivors. And you can see the two of them, the one on the extreme right and left, convey an intense sense of shame and self-inflicted isolation that comes chiefly from self-stigmatization. So this is an extremely common challenge affecting roughly about half of those living with people living with TB, and this came out of the assessment that we've done. So our art therapy workshop, what we thought was an art therapy workshop, actually seemed to take the experience of living with TB to another level, making it more acutely felt, amplifying its agony, if you like, and it ended up as a sort of a cathartic experience. So what I wanted to essentially say is, because this is like a discussion, that's going to help us all learn together through these discussions. I'd like to throw it open to the group. The similarity of the experience with TB stigma is a very real thing for many, many people living with TB in this country. But the danger again is that of its singular, sort of a signature monotony. And should we, as people working in the public health domain, challenge that? I feel strongly that this needs to be challenged and broken so that we can sort of break through and move on to newer, more empowering sort of narratives. So we don't want to keep reinforcing that imagery. At the same time, we want to respect what people are going through. So this is the toss-up here. So at what point, what kinds of interventions should we be designing that factors in the feelings of the community and what they want to say? And how can we help them see other parts of them that they themselves are stopping short of seeing? As you know, to quote Chimamanda, if you show people as one thing, as only one thing over and over again, that's what they become. So, and it's impossible to talk about the single story without talking about power. So like our economic and political world, stories too are defined by the principle of power. How they're told, who tells them, when they're told, how many stories are told are really dependent on power. So my question to the group really is, who's telling their stories, whether it's people living with TB survivors and champions, and people living with mental illness, who is it that's telling their stories? And are we inadvertently pushing them towards telling a story that is too monotonous, too singular, and too self-affirming in a negative way? So let me tell you, just give you a little bit of an effort from our side to sort of try and break some of these stereotyping that might inadvertently come from our interventions. So we partnered with the News Minute in order to create awareness about TB, visualizing the voices of the community. The faces you see on screen are all people living with TB. And while we train journalists, here's a simple checklist that we devised to sort of, stress on diverse voices as well, apart from the explanatory aspects of it. And these are examples from some of our journalists who've sort of focused on the explanatory aspect of it. Here is which the slide I wanted to focus on. Does my writing have powerful quotes? Does it have a human face, features, descriptions, and perspectives of people with TB? Not your perspective of them, but their own perspectives as they see themselves. And what about service providers? Why are they being left out of the discourse? And so on. So here are some stories that try to break some of the stereotypes. And again, focus on confidentiality, use language that's inclusive and non-discriminatory. Does it demonstrate balance and objectivity as much as possible? And does it contextualize the lived experience of the person? So these are all simple tools that we use to sort of help journalists think through some of these things while they're reporting their stories. So here are some illustrations, interpreting data, sending clear messages. So how do you convert a boring table like this into something that audiences can relate to and make sense of it in their own lives? So this is some of the work that we've been doing with journalists. But coming back to the danger of that singular way we portray people with illness of any sort, let me tell you a different story. So some of you may recognize this very famous painting by, Vincent Van Gogh. And this was painted in the winter of 1888 when he supposedly had a mental breakdown and he sought admission into an asylum near Saint Remy de Provence. And the famous work that you see here is called The Starry Night. And this is Van Gogh's impression of the view from his asylum room window. So my question was essentially this: is this the sort of thing we should be focusing our workshops on, their perspective of how they see things that might lie outside the TB domain or outside the mental illness domain, like simple, ordinary things by which they can find points of reference in the world that are not defined by their illness. So this is, again, more beautiful paintings by someone. And, we've sort of learned to see past Van Gogh's illness, and we see him through his art. So we've been conditioned that way. We see past his struggles with his mental being. We love his art. And the art is so powerful that the man and his illness have become its instruments, And to illustrate what is possible with news media, I'll show you an example of an award-winning story from the Third Pole, which is an Internews partner that documents community voices along the Brahmaputra. I mean, I've made a little bit of a jump from illness to One Health. Here is an innovative way that a journalist has brought out the feelings of the communities that live along the banks of the Brahmaputra. There's some lovely visuals here. But what she essentially did is took a boat and traveled down the Brahmaputra herself, documenting how communities' lives have changed as the river has eroded, as the dams have been built upstream to block the flow of water, and how livelihoods have changed and how their whole state of health has changed. The lyrics all talk about how their village was once full of fields and they were growing rice, and it's not possible anymore because of the water logging and So I encourage you, I know we're running out of time, so I'd like to hand it back to Anant at this point, but I would strongly recommend that you go through this whole story, which is just won an award for innovative storytelling. And this is a beautiful confluence of journalism backed by evidence that forefronts community voices. So I'll leave you with this and my questions for the discussion later. And now thank you so much for your patient attention. And it's back to you, Anant.
Thank you so much, Jaya. That was really very interesting. I mean, I like the fact that you brought together these diverse experiences of working with TV champions, with the journalists, and also gave us some interesting examples of how communication can happen and how we can sort of also share stories in a way which which evokes emotions. When I was hearing those audio clips, it was like Bhupen Hazarika moment for me. So I know all of us have some connections, but it's also important for us to recognize today that unfortunately Northeast India, especially Assam, is going through a series of climate change related events, a really devastating flood right now. So our thoughts and prayers are with friends and colleagues in Assam and other parts of the Northeast. And if you can, please do contribute in any way to the relief efforts. But thank you, Jaya, once again for joining and sharing. So now I'll pivot to Siddhesh. Siddhesh, you've spoken about your own lived experiences. You've highlighted caste-based discrimination and violence and the impact it has on children, families, communities. You've also spoken about the impact of continuous discrimination taking its own toll, which is a very heavy toll on mental health and well-being. Can I request you to talk about your own work, how you use your art, and how do you communicate the agitation and angst you have in this regard? And what kind of social impact do you hope that your work will create, and what kind of change are you hoping for? So over to you, Siddhesh.
Thanks, Anant, for having me, and thanks everybody for sparing your time to see some of my work and listen to me. And I'm basically here to give you my perspective on mental health as a political artist, as a Dalit person, and as a person with epilepsy. It's a three-way attack: thrice the struggle, thrice the agitation, and I guess thrice the strength also. We as human beings, I always consider that we as human beings are social beings and cultural beings. And since the kind of background that I come from, I do not feel that I have that dependency or I have a culture to fall back onto, because the narratives or the stories that have been shared about my community, my families, are a bit different, are a bit complicated for a person, especially for children to comprehend even, and to grow themselves into careerists or beings who are going to work professionally in different professions. For me, the culture, the whole concept of mental health starts after I get over with the discrimination part, or the social evil or the social devil that I have to encounter every day. So I'll tell you a bit about where I come from, and how I think of mental health, or how I have to deal with mental health, and how so many people like me have to go through similar situations, similar circumstances. So as I told, as I said that, we are more than human beings, we are social and cultural beings as well. And as I said that, there is no culture to fall back onto. We somehow got freed on 26th of January and 1950. And before this, our life has been controlled by social groups, by institutions, by organizations, and they were controlled so deeply and so harshly, so cunningly, so shrewdly, that the concept of emancipation, the concept of freedom, the concept of liberty, the concept of equality and fraternity was a very far-fetched dream, or maybe it wasn't a dream for the mass or for the chunk of the population. I always think of, that after 70 years of independence, of my independence, of the independence of my people, not just from the foreigners, but from the masters of our own race, of our own country. I always think about whether, even though the Constitution gives me this privilege of practicing any religion or any faith or any culture, I always wonder if the temples that have that still oppresses my community, where a person who is following Hindu rituals, going as a groom on a horse, is lynched and beaten and killed. A person who is just keeping mustaches being killed, and for where they come from. Would I have those temples to fall back onto? Or as a pig eater, would the Allah accept me? Or the white Jesus would accept me? So I do not know which culture that I can fall into, where I belong to. I sometimes feel this loneliness, this isolation, not as a society, because when I go out, even now I'm in Dalhousie, when I go out and I talk to people, most of the time I'm getting agitated, because most of the time they're talking about purity, they're talking about things that suits them in the hierarchy, the classist and the casteist way of thinking. And I have to always listen to these people. I have to always somehow swallow this agitation, or swallow this uncontrollable thoughts that goes inside. So I do not understand where I belong to, or where I fall back to, or what my roots are. I do not have that heritage to fall back into. I have no stories to think about, which can act as a Patronus charm, and which could take me to a nostalgia which is happy, which is a merry land, or something like that. So I think that with time, and in these 70 years of independence, what I have learned is that maybe there is no culture to fall back into, but there is a scope of forming a new culture. So I, with my work, try to make a culture, maybe, or I'm trying to progress as a culture. I'm trying, because nothing has been documented, none of our art has been come out in mainstream without an appropriation by the oppressor castes. So even sometimes claiming my own work or my own people's work is difficult for me, because it has all been transformed in even in the capitalized world, it has been transformed into something which is very far-fetched, which is very difficult to achieve for our people. Even opening a restaurant or a shop, there are 100 things that you might not even consider. I a few months back, I met this halwai who wanted to start a new shop in an area which was away from his area, which was away from the area where his caste people or his community lived. And he was so afraid of investing there, that because he comes from a community, they will, and in small towns, these words about your community, your location, your faith and everything spreads so quickly. And he's so afraid that even though he has a capital, he's not he doesn't know that, he will he be able to make profit, out of it. Maybe however good his mithais are, it doesn't matter. So, it doesn't matter how good your skills are still. It doesn't matter how good your, however meritorious you are, but, you still come from certain caste, class, location, which always hinder your growth, which always is the hurdle in this marathon of I do not know in this marathon of life, or I do not know what. I think, like, for me, a very radical change happened when Dr. Ambedkar came to my life, when I started not just reading him, but trying to imagine him alive, trying to imagine him in my time, trying to imagine him in the future, trying to imagine him in the past and the past before him. This man started to give me hope, and started to make me feel like a king, which my ancestors never were. So this was a very interesting feeling that I developed as an artist, maybe as a person who has a creative mind, maybe. But it was a very interesting thing that happened. That a non-artist, a person who's a very good scholar and academician, is not just your muse or your inspiration, but a very big influence in your work, in your way of thinking, in your way of living, and in the way of in your way of learning as well. So I started learning about Ambedkar. I started learning about what he tried to learn and how he became what he became. I started to reinvent my past. Because there has been no culture, but still there are some little bit of things here and there. There are really impressive work done by people like Savitri Mai, by Jyotiba Phule, by a lot of people, and even from the Bhakti period or the Nirgun period of Kabir or Ravidas or Tukaram or Nyandev. Or there are so many examples. There are so many people who have fought for this concept of equality, liberty, and fraternity before French Revolution. Way before Bhakti period, Buddha came, and in a way he was as rebellious as Phule's or Ambedkar. So I started to think about or rethink about my past or the past of my ancestors, and started to document them as they might have been as human beings, because they had no resources to be documented. So here I come, trying to imagine and reimagine certain scenes of their lives, certain incidences, accidents of their lives, and trying to bring it out to the people so that they can have a small bit of culture to fall back to. They have a small bit of confidence about where they come from, so that they do not have to go through this continuous inferiority complex of almost 2.5 decades. So I somehow wanted to because as a visual artist, as a visual designer, my senses of vision are way more heavy than the other senses. And because of the lack of the visual imagery of my community, of my people, of my ancestors, of my family, I always felt that there was a void. So I have to always step into some other person's shoes and try to find my heritage there. I would try to find my heritage in a Brahmin's house, in a Vaishya's house, or in anybody else's house whose history or whose rituals are being documented in the mainstream media or in the film, cinema, and music and whatnot. So I started to rethink about the history, and not just and not play with it in the terms of narrative, but play with it in the terms of visual narrative and visual iconography and symbolism and semiotics. Ambedkar also gives at least me a way of looking at the world as a global citizen. So when I started reading Ambedkar, there are a lot of references that he gives about from various parts of the world, and I thought to myself that there is a lot of allyship that I can find in other oppressed communities. Because here for 70 years, I haven't found a true allyship yet. And so I think Ambedkar gave me this, this vision that, there is not just, this country is not, it should not limit you. There are things that are beyond it. There are things that beyond these lands, which looks this way, which follows this culture or this ritual or this. I'm sorry. Am I audible?
Yes, Siddhesh, we can hear you.
Yeah, you are.
And can you see my screen as well? I don't know if.
No, actually, we couldn't. I don't know if you were sharing, but we were very animatedly listening to you.
Oh, was I not sharing it?
No, you did not. But you want to quickly walk us through the images? I know you have some images, but your storytelling was by itself very visual. So we could.
I'm really sorry about that.
That's it. Why don't you do it quickly, and then I'll request you to maybe wrap up so that we can do this.
Yeah, just.
Thank you.
Yeah, this was when I was talking about myself. This was when I was talking about about the culture, the lack of culture, the lack of a place to fall back to. This was when I was talking about my inferiority complexes and my experiences as a Dalit. This is looking towards a new culture, or trying to make a new culture, or finding a way, more progressive way, and rebuilding our stories. This was about when I was talking about Dr. Ambedkar, about how he influenced me and how he tried to, give me this thought of rethinking and reinventing the visual imagery, the visual symbolism, the visual semiotics of my ancestors, of my community people from the past, and even in the present. This was when I was talking about the global scenario that we should see as human beings, as people, as global citizens, the perspective that Dr. Ambedkar brought by his writings and by his speeches. And this is basically a visual that it's a very simple visual, where there is Constitution of India in the background, and there is Ambedkar pulling us up. And this image signifies that our real freedom was on 26th of January 1950, and how from that day the real progress of not just our people but of the country started to happen, because a country is not a country without its people, and people mean all the people, not just 20% people or 30% people. So my whole the whole existence of my life is maybe to rebuild our history, and I think this is the only way. This is the only way that we can now start to document what we are now, and we can start to document what we were before, and make a safe space in the future for the people. I just do not want to remain a Dalit. I do not just want to always speak about this. I want to see a world, at least before I die, where I do not have to introduce myself, or my work is not just seen as a work produced by a Dalit person. And when all this will be over, I think we will be able to talk about the scientific side of my epilepsy, or my mental health. Because before this, before all this mental health, before all this scientific inquiries that we have, there is this social discrimination which does not let us, which makes it very difficult for us to explore the world in the way that everybody is looking, because everybody is looking from a bird eye view, looking down, that how a certain community, or a certain unprivileged community are lacking this or that. But the story is way bigger. The story is way more complicated, and it has to be looked upon with that way. People have to go down, or the people from the down have to rise and show this story to the people, not with the bird eye view, but with the view of human beings, to the human beings, for the human beings, and for the society. Thank you very much. I think that's all I had to say and share.
Thank you so much, Siddhesh. This is, of course, an incredibly personal journey for you, and we are very thankful that you decided to share it with us. The art that you described, even before you showed us the imagery, was already very, very visual, but the images just add on. So thank you for sharing your art. Thank you for being an artist and for and sharing your angst and protest through art, because I think just by doing that, those stories become real, and the intersectionalities that you talked about, history, religion, caste, class, lived experience, and what it means in today's world, and what we can hope for in terms of a future world are very powerful. So pleasure to have you again on the panel, and thank you so much again.
Thank you.
We will now move on to our next panelist, Faith. Faith, can I request you to tell us that as a storyteller, an entrepreneur, and an activist practitioner for change in communities, maybe can you describe the work that you've been doing, how you have leveraged storytelling and the arts in the health space, and what have you learned from that experience? What are sort of key takeaways in your own work with communities and working with young people, etc. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Anant, and thanks Siddhesh and Jaya as well. It was actually really difficult trying to figure out a single project to share, but I'm keeping it really specific actually to just one project that I'll share with the group. Otherwise, I'm working on a sort of a range of projects at the moment, a couple to do with mental health specifically, but I won't actually be sharing those today. And then a couple to do with health systems. And this is one that I thought could be quite interesting for the group. It's something that have been working on now for over a year. And actually, Anant, you may be familiar. It's kind of the taking forward some of the IRB work that we had shared last year. And yeah, I'll just jump right in and I'll share a video towards the end. Towards the end, I'll just share my screen. Great. So just really quickly to let the group know. So I work. I work with an interdisciplinary design research consulting firm called Quicksand, and through Quicksand and with Quicksand, I work on a range of different projects to do with producing media, both for research, advocacy, and interventions like this one, particularly across public health. But Quicksand works across a range of other issues as well. Just let me know in case you can't. The screen is visible, right? Just checking.
Yes, it is. Go ahead.
Great. So I'll run. It's an animation film that I wanted to share with you with the group, and then tell you a little bit about essentially, how you could think about using game design and aspects of game design for your work, both for research and then also from the point of view of an intervention or a health intervention. Unfortunately, it's a long video. It's not public yet. So I'll just kind of run, it's about 20 minutes or so. It's a 2D animation, which we just in fact finished last week, finally, after about like almost 8 months. I'll just take you through briefly what the video is and show you a couple minutes of about the 20-minute video. This is part of a project on participatory innovations to look at experiential-based learning and gamification. And we've called this game Kalpana Ki Kahani. It has two manifestations. One, which I'll share with you now, which is the physical, like a board game, essentially. So folks here might be familiar with games like Snakes and Ladders or Monopoly or, I don't know, like other kinds of games. So it will be reminiscent in a sense of your traditional kind of a board game, but with this added element of the animation film that goes along with it. These are some of the goals. I'll just kind of talk over them. It's a really interesting project. Personally, for me as well, it was really interesting because of being able to work on a project with kind of a split set of goals, looking both at research and intervention. Within kind of the research arm, things we are trying to learn about are how can we identify opportunities for adolescent girls and young women in India, particularly what are their kind of diverse needs? How do we understand their, their heterogeneous kind of identities and needs, and also their relationship goals? And then how can we influence them so that they are more likely to take up HIV prevention adoption, both measures and potentially products? And as a kind of background to this, I think the only thing that is sort of important to mention is this is a very large scale problem, but is in terms of the risk that young women and even adolescent girls are to HIV and STIs. And within that context, this intervention has been designed. And then from an intervention perspective, it's specifically trying to target and tackle the kind of low risk perception, and also looking at helping young women to be able to connect the long term as well as the short term implications and outcomes of decisions that they make regarding their health, how it would affect them in the short term and in the long term, and therefore how can they potentially change their decision making, or what would it take to change their decision making so that they can essentially make decisions that will help promote their health. So that's a little bit about the context there. These are three insights that are important to share. I think that the game and the film is based on, I'll just leave those up on the screen for the group, but a couple of examples, for example, which you'll see when I share the film about the young woman. There's a distorted perception of risk. For example, young women are more likely to think that unwanted pregnancies are more dangerous or more likely rather than an STI or HIV. They face many challenges, which I think we will all be able to relate to, be aware of, in prioritizing their own health over societal expectations. So, for example, there is fear of reprimand or punishment that seems a lot more prominent, and it seems a lot more of a bigger problem than, for example, an intangible possible negative health outcome from a decision. And then finally, and I could give many examples, just in the interest of time, I'm keeping this piece really brief, but I'm happy to share more information on any of the slides since I'm skimming past really quickly. And also looking at the fact that young women and girls are also emotional sexual beings. They need to address their relationship goals, choices, and their feelings. So what is really unique and interesting about this intervention and game is also that it's really looking at moving beyond simply kind of the health domain in how it's addressing the needs of young women. And it's trying to look at them as kind of more holistic beings, trying to understand and appreciate their emotional needs. And it's also just trying to kind of help them to connect their life goals, and particularly their relationship goals and intimate partner goals, with how they make decisions about having sex, with how they make decisions about protecting themselves, protecting their health, and furthering their sexual and reproductive health and needs and goals. And that hopefully will be evidenced through the game as I share it. This is, before I kind of jump into just sharing the film with you, just to give everyone a sense of, I'm just kind of showing you what the game looks like. So there are 4 films. There's a character called Kalpana, we'll meet her in a minute. And there's a board game, there's cards. And what we've tried to do essentially is be able to take those research components. So we are a complex set of multiple choice questions that we want young women who play this game, they'll play this game in groups to answer. Those we've tried to illustrate out on, you can see these play sheets. I'll just show you a kind of a zoom in. So these are kind of folded play sheets that you basically go on a journey answering all these questions through different parts of the game. There are these interactive game boards where different cards are placed and you see all of the characters from Kalpana's life. And finally, there's feeling cards and scenario cards. So they look like this. These are different characters from the film you'll see in a moment. And essentially what the game does is it has young women sit together, play together and have conversations through creating the safe space with each other. It's led by a peer facilitator, so other young women will be leading it. And essentially what it's doing is taking you through different situations, and I'll share the first one with you. So in a nutshell, Kalpana, our main character, first finds out that she might be pregnant. In the second film, we find out actually, no, she's not pregnant, but she might have HIV or an STI. And then in the third film, we find out, okay, no, she doesn't have HIV. However, she's at an important juncture, and a potential product is introduced to her that will allow her to both protect herself from pregnancy and HIV. And then we kind of help her make decisions around how she can protect herself, both, like I said at the beginning, so that she can live a kind of a healthy life, fulfill her personal goals, fulfill her own relationship goals with her partners, and then also whatever life goals she has, and help young women to kind of think about, how a decision today could, yes, impact them today. For example, if I break up with my boyfriend today, I'll be sad, I'll be upset, I'll really feel a sense of loss, but actually in the long run, maybe it's not a bad thing. So there are a lot of interesting scenarios that are woven into the game to do two things. One, help players to make this distinction between short-term and long-term outcomes, but then equally also to make distinctions between internal and external worlds. What is happening in Kalpana, as you can see on the board, her internal mind and world, and then what's happening outside, and what are the linkages there that affect the internal and the external. And then finally, the different characters or actors in her life, her parents, her friends, her doctor, her partner, what is the role that they have on how she makes decisions. And I'll just show you guys a couple of the visuals so you can see. It's a game that will be played over a couple of hours, and I'll just queue up the video and play. I hope I'm good for time. Sorry, I'll just play a couple minutes, maybe, or a minute and a half. Sorry, I'm just going to reshare my screen with the audio so that you can hear.
मैं ठीक हूँ, ऑफिस में भी सब ठीक है। तुम तो जानती हो काम सब कैसा चलता है। तुम बताओ, तुम कैसी हो? कल्पना, तुम सुन तो रही हो ना?
हाँ, अंजलि, थैंक यू मेरे साथ आने के लिए। मुझे पता है तुम्हें यहाँ आने के लिए ऑफिस से छुट्टी लेनी पड़ी है। देखो अंजलि, वैसे तो मैं ठीक हूँ, लेकिन पिछले कुछ दिनों से मेरी तबीयत ठीक नहीं लग रही है। बहुत अजीब सा लग रहा है। मुझे लगा था कि मैं अपने आप ही ठीक हो जाऊंगी, मगर ऐसा हुआ ही नहीं। कहीं कुछ गड़बड़ हुई तो?
अरे, इसमें थैंक यू की क्या बात है कल्पना? देखो, तुम चिंता मत करो, देखते हैं ना डॉक्टर क्या कहती हैं। अच्छा, चलो मुझे ये बताओ, तुम्हारी क्लासेस कैसी चल रही हैं?
खैर, क्लासेस तो ठीक ही चल रही हैं, लेकिन मेरी तबीयत ठीक ना होने के कारण मैं पढ़ाई पर ध्यान ही नहीं दे पा रही हूँ। और ऊपर से मम्मी पापा मेरे फ्यूचर को लेकर काफ़ी चिंतित हैं और उसकी वजह से मुझ पर काफ़ी दबाव भी डाल रहे हैं। लेकिन मैंने अभी तक सोचा ही नहीं है मुझे करना क्या है। कल्पना, आपको डॉक्टर बुला रही हैं।
हेलो कल्पना, क्या परेशानी हो रही है तुम्हें?
हेलो डॉक्टर, दरअसल बात ये है कि मेरे पीरियड 2 हफ्ते लेट हैं। मुझे थोड़ा डिस्चार्ज भी हो रहा है और मेरे पेट में भी दर्द रहता है।
अच्छा, मुझे ये बताओ कि क्या तुम्हारे शारीरिक
Cool. I'm just going to pause that there. I'll just skip to the end so that you can just get a sense of the end, and then just 30 seconds there and I'll stop the video.
इसका पूरा असर मुझ पे पड़ेगा, तो मुझे ही फैसला लेना होगा ना।
बहुत सारी लड़कियों को कोई लक्षण भी नहीं होते, फिर भी उनकी यौन रोग और HIV की जांच पॉजिटिव आती है।
इस बार तो मैं बाल बाल बच गई, लेकिन आगे भी ऐसा हुआ तो? मुझे तो अंदाजा भी नहीं था कि मुझे यौन रोग या HIV का खतरा हो सकता है। मैंने कभी सोचा भी नहीं था कि मेरी जैसी लड़की के साथ भी ऐसा हो सकता है।
Cool. Am I out of time? Otherwise, I just had one more slide, but that's optional. I just wanted to share a few quick insights. But I can share this with the group later as well. Anyone?
Hi, Faith. Sorry, Anant has dropped off. This is Shweta. Could you cover this in like 2 minutes? We can then move into Q&As.
This is also helpful for anyone who's looking to sort of integrate storytelling into their work. So whether it's, research or an intervention or both, or some sort of activity as well, where you want to kind of incorporate stories. These are a few things that I found particularly helpful. And I kind of do revisit this myself from time to time. And I'll just try and weave in a couple examples. So, when we were creating the animation, sorry, I could only show you so little bit of it and you couldn't see all the other characters and all of that. We did a lot of research on, how to present the context appropriately, and some things resonated strongly, with what Siddhesh was also sharing earlier in terms of art forms appropriation, staying true to, the character, how to represent a quote unquote a woman, a certain kind of a young woman. How do we present someone who is relatable but also distinct, etc. So you'll come across a lot of really interesting questions, when you're trying to uncover how to present context and also not gloss over all of the really important heterogeneity that exists. Safeguarding also really important. How do we tell the story? There's, for example, interesting parts in the film and this particular game where there are interactions that relate to intimate partner violence, and how do you share those in a way that is both safe for viewers, but at the same, it can be very triggering. So how to navigate that in whatever kind of context is really important to think about. Also in our game, obviously, we're looking at perception and behavior, and how can a story like this drive both of those. How do we challenge stigma? How do we challenge silence and shame on issues, whether it's to do with, say, a specific kind of mental health issue, or in this case, STIs or HIV? And then how do you utilize those stories in a sense to also drive behavior? And I think what I found compelling, in both what Dr. Jaya and Siddhesh were sharing, I think, and obviously in Kalpana's story here, I think there's a common strand to do with empathy, and how can we trigger, build and enhance empathy and understanding in order to change or drive behavior. And finally, evidence. I think we heard from Dr. Jaya on that a fair bit in the beginning. How do we prioritize evidence in our storytelling? And also, not to forget, ethics of storytelling can be quite complicated. So how to kind of navigate those. So yeah, so that's it. Yeah, thanks a lot, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Faith. Now that was very interesting also to hear about how you brought some of these stories of real life experiences, which adults and girls and young women can have, and try to make them sort of gamified, but also easier to understand, and perhaps by giving them the options of various choices they could make, help them also in their own life in making decisions. So very interesting work again. I will now open up for discussion, and I might just as well start with you, Faith. If you could speak to a little bit around the process of developing these sort of interactive games. How do you actually do that? How do you involve also your target audience, which in this case is adults, girls and young women, and what process is involved, just so that our Sangath colleagues who are also similarly working with a diversity of populations will also understand the process of working with communities, so that their inputs are taken at the design stage. So please to share a little bit around that.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's two parts there. So one is, with respect to a project like the one that I've shared here, while there was definitely what you call a co-creation component. So in other words, how do you create with the contributors that you want to feature? How do you tell a story, from their point of view? But obviously it is also from your point of view. We are driving a very clear agenda with the game, with the film, which is to do with the specific goals outlined. But there's a lot, I think, with that caveat, that can be done through co-creation if you do it effectively. And that kind of spans, both like how you go about recruiting people that you co-create with, how inclusive is the co-creation process really. And also, I guess, like striking a balance kind of between your goals and needs and what you're trying to achieve, but also staying true to the needs and goals of those whom you're supposed to represent. So for example, in this particular project, we did a bunch of visits both in Bombay and Delhi, and then some of them were done remotely as well, with young women in different communities, and it was really insightful and interesting and we had taken basically a very raw prototype of the game and the films that were literally like sketches and audiovisuals and so on at that stage, to look at how they were responding to a range of things, everything going from characters and how they looked to the comprehensibility, the questions, the dialogue, the language, etc. And there's a lot that you could do, again, I think, depending on what your goal is, through that co-creation process. And co-creation doesn't have to only be at the design stage. In our project, for example, it was this particular project, it was largely at the design stage where there was co-creation. But I know there are other projects. For example, I'll just share one other example. So with Outlive, which is a project that Quicksand and I am also working with Sangath on, they were following a different process where contributors, so there's essentially one of the components for the public engagement for that is lived experience stories on film, not anonymous, where contributors are sharing and disclosing, typically for the first time, their suicide prevention journey and story. And they we followed a very different, it's a much more involved process going over a longer period of time, where you get to know the contributor. The contributor is actively either leading, working on, or contributing to their script for their story, how they want to tell it. There's examples we'll share with Sangath shortly when these films are published. That also are really interesting, where contributors have chosen the location, they've chosen the other people in the frame. They work with us and the filmmakers, on everything ranging from how they would like the frame to be and so on. So I think there's no sort of blueprint for how to do this, but there's a lot of good guiding principles one can follow for how to really co-create and make that creation journey inclusive with the community or the contributor whose story essentially, you wanted to share.
Great, thanks, Faith. Okay, now Jaya, there was a question for you around the fact that the participant speaks about the fact that they completely agree with your point, how some patients or clients would express their work through art. It's not just art; they are also expressing their sort of interactions with the health services through words, poems, etc. If only people were able to see their viewpoint, understand them, engaging with them would be much easier. So the question specifically is how to do this on a large scale, and how to involve more people, especially survivors, champions, communities, in such efforts, so that we can use the arts to be able to communicate to providers, to the health system, to policymakers. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is why I mentioned that for large public health programs that collect community feedback, either in the form of art or poetry or songs, there's got to be these pathways that have to be established. And how we're doing it is, making these district level networks of people living with TB, helping them to organize these little get-togethers where people can draw and then, collect the feedback and then send it back to us. And then we can always display it, digitally on a website or something like that. But some of the ideas that we've been tossing around are like, let's say, you want to talk about your experience of living with a bipolar disorder or something like that. And it's if someone can sort of support it, create a website where people can express themselves freely, with some help. It'll have to be channeled through an organization, say like Sangath, and then it can sort of like be a panel of artwork. It can be a living art gallery, if you like, digitally, that can be done. But for a large public health program, it has to, if you want to create this community feedback, you'll have to work with the government to establish these channels. In our TV support hubs, what we're planning to do is to devote a portion of the wall for community feedback, in the form of their pictures or their poetry, or, their children can do things, and, we can put them up there and keep them on display for people. Also to, to showcase community art, for instance. So these are some of the things that that we are thinking of. But digitally, to do it digitally might be less expensive. If you look at the PARI website, the People's Archive of Rural India, you'll find lots of examples of some community expressions and things that have been very nicely sort of showcased, almost like an album. That's a good history of community voices that can be captured digitally. It'll require a lot of effort and planning to do it, but these are just some ideas, and it's a good question. Needs more thought. Thank you.
Thanks, Jaya. Siddhesh, question for you. You spoke about issues around appropriation. So what in your thoughts would be the meaningful allyship in the visual arts? How do we approach that in a way that is respectful and it doesn't take on, take on spaces which should be rightfully given to communities, which might be going through a certain set of stigmatization or discrimination, or the platform should belong. There's a very famous quote also by a tribal poet that you would know of, who talks about the fact that it's often the inverted commas experts who take up the spaces and the stage, and they speak of someone else's stories. And how do we prevent that from happening, yet have mechanisms for meaningful allyship to operate?
I guess the allyship will start when the lying will stop, because the people who are at the top ladder of visual semiotics and symbolism, who are deciding what goes out in the mainstream media, I don't know if they are not able to see it or they want to neglect it. But as I see, in most of the slums in India, you'll find an iconography of Ambedkar or of a local Dalit leader, because most of the Dalits, most of the people from underprivileged communities live and dwells in these areas. But when in a film, the hero rises from this, from this area, there is no iconography of people who are actually living in those areas. So I think that if that lying is stopped, if nobody is asking you to make a film where somebody is going to be a savior and going to bring up people, I think just documenting it without lying would be the first step to the allyship. And then we can think about an allyship where a Bob Dylan is writing a song on the hurricane. So I think that is a far-fetched dream, but I think I think we have to level this ground first, that we have to stop lying that these people doesn't exist, or if they exist for the special occasion or for a special motive, for a special subject. So I think we are not just subjects. So I think when we will be in the visual vocabulary of people as regular people who dwells around you, with you, I think that would be the first step to the allyship. And then we can, talk about the more progressive ideas of allyship, or, who is a true ally and other things. Yeah.
Thanks, Siddhesh. And what would you hope that organizations such as Sangath, which have been around for now more than 25 years, do research in the mental health and public health domain, what would be your expectation from organizations like Sangath?
To be honest, like the more I've read, there have been a lot of organizations that have formed and that have made a special case for our people. A lot of them have worked well as well. But the thing is, there are in today's time, it's very difficult to trust, because I come from a family where, there are still, my relatives, close relatives, doing work which are menial for people. There are still people who are making ice cream and telas, which, people from the elite society say that, is made of, bad water, foul water, or, foul ingredients and stuff like that. So I do not know that, what could my suggestion be, or how to see, an organization, because I have started to lose trust. There have been a lot of people, a lot of organizations, coming to the communities, saying that, they're going to help them. But then, after some time, when a project is over, they're just away. So we are just left with our own people. I think there is a huge sense of communityship in the community itself. That's how my father went to school. That's how a lot of my cousin goes to school, even though their parents do not have money. It is from the community. People are, spending some money because they believe in Ambedkar. He said that, educate first. So maybe that is the reason, like people religiously go to the temple. There is this, this feeling of people religiously going to the school, or at least the parents religiously sending their kids to the school. So I think there is always this struggle, like, because I always think that, there are a lot of people talking about us, but still, why are my cousins still have to be, fed by their own people? And, where are these organizations? So maybe, they are not reaching, everywhere. Maybe, there is some there is some miscommunication or something like that. And maybe there is not much, being talked about. So if it is not out there, it is difficult to see. So when there is something out there, when I have, when my community sees a pamphlet of an organization that, we are coming here and, we are doing this and this, they might be interested in, reaching out to the organizations and, might cultivate a relationship. But when, they're not even reaching, the problem is that, I do not know what the problem is, whether it is whether it is reaching, whether it is being communicated or not, or whether there is a trust issue, because there is a lot of trust issue as well. I have known a lot of organizations that work back in my village, that just left, people at a point where, they had to suffer from economical losses, because they were trying to, interfere in the way they are running their economy. So there is this thing that I always like, this is my honest opinion on this. It's difficult to, trust organizations and, these things anymore. Sometimes even our own. So, but I always see hope, because I have seen, even single human being like Gail Ombet doing really, really, incredible work, and she's known as Gail Tai to the community. She comes from outside. Her skin color is different. She talks differently. She has studied different things, but, she became so much with the people that, so there is Gail, a hope. So I know that, there is a hope, and there are possibilities of a better future, of that dream of equality, fraternity, and liberty. But still, I'm still able to find those, those loose ends which are still not connected, which are still not connecting people as they might, yeah.
Thanks, Siddhesh. Again, I think a clear message around the need for trust building, and also not coming in, collecting your data and leaving, but longer term relationships which establish that nuanced trust and being around, because that's the only way, you will be able to build that trust. Jaya and Faith, on this point also around how important is trust building in the work that we do, and how do we sort of engender trust in the communities that we work with, because in the absence of trust, anything that you might try out will always be looked upon with skepticism. So if we are really talking about social reform and work for social good, then how important is that, and how have you approached it in your own sort of endeavors? So maybe Jaya, if you want to go first, and then Faith.
Sure. I think this is a really important points that Siddhesh has raised. I couldn't agree with him more. I mean, if you look at it as someone once said, NGOs are still, Mother Teresa, businesses dressed up as Mother Teresa. I mean, our work depends on the funding we get, and it's always got a limited. We do have a long-term vision, but limited by budgets and project periods and reporting requirements and so on. And sometimes one is forced to follow donor priorities and fit proposals to suit what a donor who lives in another country and is probably alienated from the communities we're seeking to serve as what they see is the solution to do X, Y, or Z. So I completely agree with what Siddhesh said. So for trust building, I think it's really key that, the leadership is there should be opportunities for communities to be able to speak openly. And I find that as the first stumbling block whenever an NGO tries to work closely with the community. It's a genuine lack of representation from there. Someone speaking what the community feels and conveying that experience in a completely frank way to the NGO. I mean, I think that's the first thing that's missing. I mean, invariably, they end up telling you what you want to hear. They want to trust, they want to make friends and so on. But I think somewhere along the way, I don't know if Faith will disagree, but very often you go out there for a focus group discussion and you'll find people telling you what you want to hear. Because the way you introduce yourself, I mean, that itself changes the narrative. It's intrusive right there to start with. So what really is the solution is to be able to listen without intruding, I think. Non-intrusive, non-judgmental, absolute fly on the wall listening, and that takes time in order to be respectful of a community's feelings and to understand what they're going through. It's never possible because you're not from that community, but just to be able to respectfully listen and take time to do that and understand what it's about, I think that's the first step. And to be able to demonstrate respect, I think that's the second most important aspect of trust building. And the third thing is, I think, not to promise solutions, not to go out there with your objectives and say that these are the boxes I have to tick in a short period of time. Or if that's the case, and if it's an emergency, public health emergency, tell them transparently upfront, this is how long we're going to be here. This is what we're going to try and help you with, and this is what we have the funds for. So be very, very transparent about it. So I think these are the three things that I would say are the early. They may not be the best things to do. I don't know. This is from my perspective, from what I've learned.
So thanks, Jaya. Faith?
Yeah, thanks, Jaya. I think Jaya's covered a couple of the kind of more crucial points that I wanted to share. There is, I think the first thing, not maybe that one must not belabor this point, but there is a big problem with funding and how that relates to storytelling and then, therefore trust building and so on. And I think while some efforts are being made in general to shift this, it is a long way to go in that. And it's a really kind of complicated, it's a great question, honestly. It's a complicated one though. And I'll just share like a couple anecdotes to answer. So in the many years when I was working more directly in communities, I had to do a couple of things. One was kind of going in and a lot of effort into trust building. And I've also experienced many situations where that trust felt broken or where we were accused of breaking that trust. And it's a very, very difficult line to tread for a variety of reasons, I think these 2 points that Jaya said at the end in terms of just being honest and being transparent, I think they do go a long way in explaining to a community why you're there, what you're going to do, where you can also call out the limitations. I find calling out limitations is quite helpful in the spirit of being honest and transparent and saying, look, like this is what we definitely can't do. This is what definitely will not get achieved. But here's what we will definitely try and do through this initiative or through telling this story or through creating this film, making this film or photo essay, whatever it might be. Those are really helpful. And then the other thing that I found helpful is, so for example, it's a common practice, but it's definitely one that can be utilized in other sort of ways of storytelling and so on also, is longer interventions and longer like planning where you don't go just once into a community, where it's multiple series of visits. You tend to overcome a lot of the issues. I agree with being told what you want to hear, and that's often not because like people are trying to hide anything, because they don't see the value in being honest with you. And once they see the value in being honest with you, they are much more likely to be honest with you. And I can't kind of agree more on that point of finding ways. I think we can say go in and don't be judgmental and be a fly on the wall, but what does it mean to actually do that? I think requires a lot of effort and a lot of kind of mental training and just hard work, to take that mindset in. But it's a really rewarding one. I think if you're able to do that, it helps you to tell stories and document things in the best way possible. So I could really talk about this for a long time, but I'll stop.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to add something, Anant. I also think that, I don't know, I speak for the organizations that I work with, but when you begin work, you talk about underserved communities, all this jargon, and one tends to look for community weaknesses. You look for problems, we look for barriers, we look for gaps that we can bridge. We go in there riding on our white horses to bridge those gaps. And I think one of the things that we'll be training ourselves to do is to learn to recognize and look for community strengths and to respect that and help communities leverage their own strengths. And very often, I think the barriers, the whole conversation is more about barriers than about the strengths of the community. And I don't even think we have a lens to recognize those strengths. As Siddhesh was saying, these are very, very resilient communities, surviving despite several odds and systemic violence. And what is it that keeps them ticking? So I think that we have to develop the tools to recognize that strength, to respect it, and to work with it, even if we feel less important in the process. I mean, I'm not speaking for myself, I'm speaking for many NGOs that I've seen who feel that they are there to, bring succor to the underprivileged. Thanks.
Thanks, yeah. No, it's good to have this sort of critical tone to our conversations towards the end of this webinar, and it's also an important reminder for us to not have some kind of a God or savior complex. These are really, as Siddhesh very rightly said, very, very complex issues, first of all, to deal with. But humility, I think, is one element which all of us could do better. Siddhesh, we are out of time, but I do want you to have the last word. And there was this beautiful sort of sunshine shining through the window at your back as you were speaking. What would you hope from conversations like this? As we are speaking, the managing committee of Sangath is meeting, and they're sort of the decision-making body within the organization. I want one sort of crisp message that organization head leadership should hear from Siddhesh about what you would like different in this world, and including what would you expect from researchers and public health folks. So any thoughts on that? And we will make sure that we communicate that to our managing committee.
I think these conversations opens the door for the people from the community to also become decision makers, because that's a very important point, or that's a very important place to be, not just because there are a lot of things that are not communicable. They're very difficult to express because of not just the lack of skills, but because of the lack of, even the lack of the normal that we generally live. So there are a lot of things that might not be communicated, because my family, my people have lived a different kind of a life. There are ways we are different in, from cooking to cleaning to, from household works to, even going out, the way we go out, even the way we save our money or the way we invest our money. So, so there are these things that we have made for ourselves. I think when these people become decision makers, one of the decision makers, they can, somehow will be able to feel that power, or maybe feel that freedom that they can express, because they are in a position where, their expression matters. So sometimes there are just people represented in a lot of places and organizations for the sake of representation. So I think when they have some real power, like, I think some will abuse, because everybody is a human being, but I think that would bring a really, really interesting, change in how the organizations work. I think, there will be interesting stories, maybe there will be interesting opportunities even, because, there are a lot of things that, only they are seeing, there are a lot of things only they are feeling, or, they are solving a lot of problems on their own, which they have, developed a sense of, or a procedure of. And these are the problems that can be, these are the solutions that can be solutions for other beings as well, for other problems as well. There are a lot of problems that are solved by a small vegetable seller, or ek aadmi jo construction worker hai. Even these people have made so many solutions that can be used in a lot of other places. And there are a lot of people who are working, who are educated people, who are working in small scale businesses, or who are working in NGOs as researchers, or journalists and other things. They're very interesting people, because they have their own stories, they have their own set of narrative, which I think they will feel a bit, because you do not always have to make everybody a CEO or a board member, but a decision maker can be anybody. I think that concept of a decision maker can be anybody from any hierarchy is a very interesting thing, because we are producing everything that we are producing is what we are building on the human civilization that we have produced so far. So everybody has some kind of contribution, everybody has some kind of skill. So I think everybody should, it's a very idle thought maybe, but I think there is a possibility that one of the decision maker, maybe in a craft, let's talk about a craft organization, or one person who does handicraft, who might not have gone to an institute like NID or any other institute, but might have this knowledge that they have produced by the experience that they have. So those people on board with different projects, it would be really interesting, because there will be really interesting anecdotes which people might not be able to even think of. There are solutions, sometimes there are solutions right there, and we are not able to see, because we have we have kept ourselves on a pedal, that we see the world from this perspective. I think that would be an interesting thing, like, to see and to experience it. Yeah.
Thanks, there's a lot of tokens of wisdom there. Move away from tokenism in organizations, meaningful representation, leadership opportunities, listen to those voices, act on them, and bring about true reform. So thank you, everyone. We had a fabulous discussion. Of course, we're very, very thankful to all of our panelists, Jaya, Faith, Siddhesh, for sparing time, for coming today and talking to us. And this has been very useful, certainly, to all of us who participated. We have also shared it with a wider audience, and we will take a lot of these messages and try to incorporate that in our work. I also want to especially thank the PE team, Patty, Shweta, and Priyanka, who in the background have worked in setting up this webinar and helped facilitate this excellent discussion. So thank you, everyone. Apologies, we went a little bit over, but as you would have seen, we had such an interesting discussion that it was difficult to stop. So thank you. Please take care. Stay safe, everyone. And we will see you in a month's time with the next webinar. Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much, Jai.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.